Welcome everybody here to the Lakers Lounge. Not a live edition here, but for good reason. The guest that I have on today is well, we're recording super early and nobody would be watching live, so that's one thing. And the other thing too is he's a recluse. Pete is a recluse. He does not like anybody to see his face. And so when this goes up on YouTube, I will be talking to Chick Hearn, which is similar-ish. I would say. But Pete, thank you as always for coming on. That is about as high a compliment as I can give. Is like talking.
I know,
to you
man.
is...
You're coming in hot, like you gotta take me.
Well,
out
I
to
just
dinner
called you a
first, man.
recluse, so I had to balance it out.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that was just an emotional roller coaster, just as it's always been recording with you, Anthony.
but Pete is here. Obviously, he does work with the Lakers. He has the Laker Film Room podcast and all of that great stuff. He and I used to do a lot of great stuff back in the day too. So I love being able to talk to you here again. We've had to wait. We've had to put off our monthly talk until some of these moves were made official. And now that the Lakers roster is basically finalized, right? We're still waiting for a T to cross and an I to dot here and there. But I actually think we're able to talk about Russell, right? Because he was a Laker last.
Sure.
Yeah. So the Lakers roster is set. Folks on Twitter are pissed at me because of, who I am. And the way that I do.
I'm glad
this
nothing's
stuff.
changed.
It never will. It never, ever will. And I was thinking about it today, about why people are annoyed with my response to this team. And I've said all along that it's a good offseason, right? I would say it's a fine to good offseason. It's not great. They didn't land Giannis or anything. And I was thinking about why that isn't necessarily enough, for lack of a better term. And it's because I think this is the first logical offseason that we've had in a little while. And I think everybody are just this is all we've been asking for.
Sure.
Don't you dare say anything less than that is all we've been asking for, because 2 years ago, Lakers trade for Russ, and we obviously know how that goes. The following year, they don't trade Russ, and they go into the last season with 37 people 6'2" and under. Couldn't ride roller coasters at Six Flags. and then this year, though, they swap out Dennis Schroeder for Gabe Vincent, and a very logical move. I love Vincent's fit with this group. They add a wing in Taurean Prince with the biannual exception. Can never have enough wings, in my opinion. The only thing we're still waiting for, I think the only major hole that we're still waiting to address, I think, is backup center, because I don't think Jackson Hayes is quite enough. But for the most part, very logical, sensible offseason that is all Lakers fans, I think, have been hoping for. All they've been asking for is just don't put us on a roller coaster, please.
Yeah.
Just give us a nice, fine offseason. How would you define it, though?
I think you're spot on with that, and that's why I'm this is all well and good. These are all the moves we needed to make. I think we can get into some of the details of them one by one, but I agree with your characterization of Gabe Vincent and of Taurean Prince, right? I think Vincent replaces Dennis, Prince replaces Troy Brown Jr. These are good, solid moves, right? But we're trying to win a championship, right? And so one of the things that's been interesting about our last two off seasons, this one included, is they haven't really been the main event of transactions, right? Like you said, last season we didn't make the move, which as we saw was probably the correct move, because that probably is when it would have taken extra compensation to move off of Russ.
Probably.
And so the right move is to be all right, we got to hold on tight and get to the deadline, get to the point where it does make sense for a team to trade for an expiring contract. It was a roller coaster, and we did not have a balanced roster to start the season. And so, going into this next season with this team makes sense. I've seen it make sense. I've seen them be good.
Yeah.
There's also just a pure emotional part of being a fan that's I like this guy and I want to root for him. And so seeing Rui and Austin come back and sign 3 and 4 year deals, which we haven't given out a lot of those over the last few years, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of longer contracts.
Yep.
It's just nice, right? It's sign me up for the next 3 years.
I can buy his jersey.
Yeah,
I can confidently buy that guy's jersey.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm going to have fun cheering for him. That said, if you are on the Los Angeles Lakers and you make between 10 and $20 million a year, you will be in every trade rumor for the next 3+ years,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
just to make the salary work, there's going to always be you might like Austin Reaves, but do you like him as much as his shiny new point guard? Like,
Yeah,
you
right.
know what I mean? Like, that's the type of thing that is going to be a part of it. And that just comes with being a Laker. But I agree with your characterization of it, Anthony. I think that it was a good, sensible offseason, but a lot of work ahead.
Yeah, I've called it a leadoff double. You know,
Hey, let's go. Yeah,
it's you got a runner in scoring position. Don't strike out 3 times and you score a run. Just
that's good. I like that.
Yeah, at the very least, move over the runner if you're going to come in and out. You know, if you're not going to get on base, a walk is also fine. You know, just be solid, get that runner in, and draw first blood. And again, we'll talk about like specifics here in a bit, but like I want to stay macro here, and you mentioned like the Lakers focuses championships, right? And you mentioned how like if you're in that teens range, that's a movable contract, and that is, we're always going to be seeing guys' names at the top of like Fanspo, right, where they have the trade machine and they list how many guys
just
like.
Part of the deal.
You're always going to be there. I don't think that's necessarily unique to the Lakers, right? And I think
it's just louder. It's just louder.
It is.
If you're in
sure.
that with the Lakers, it's just a whole different thing.
Yeah, but I guess like with the way that the CBA is set up, there are like I think essentially all rosters moving forward, and you're going to have outliers, right? The Suns are an outlier, but I think all rosters moving forward are going to have a couple stars, some role players in the teens, and then a bunch of young people on rookie scale contracts. And I think that's where the union kind of had an oversight as far as like, I think they've really kind of priced out role players being solid, where you're going to maybe sign that deal and then you're just going to be traded a whole bunch because there's going to be a whole bunch of people at your number. But I do think though, like for the way that this roster is put together, if you're going to have a couple guys in that teen range, I like the idea of them having upside so that they can actually outperform that teen range contract. Whereas, you'll see some guys who have older players in that teen range number, who maybe might be more stable, but if everybody is going to be built the same, give me the upside. If everybody is going to be built the same way, give me guys like Reaves and give me guys like Rui who can exceed. Like Reaves' contract is going to be that's obscene in like a year. He's making $12 million next year. That's going to be a ridiculous number for a starting point guard who's like an upper echelon starting point guard or guard or whatever. But yeah, I like the notion of if everybody is going to have people in that range, give me guys who can improve. Give me guys who can actually exceed expectations there.
No, that's absolutely the case, and that's why I think the biggest move of the offseason is the Austin contract, right? And that, like, man, just if you listen to him talk and like see how he posts and like what's important to him, and I think even the contract in a way is a statement. Like that was one of the bigger storylines going into the offseason is Austin going to get some 4-year, $98 million offer from someone?
Yeah.
Because he's every time he's gotten the chance to perform, he has. And I think that culminated in all the way through, like all 3 series, even at the beginning of the Warrior series, he wasn't playing well, and he played himself into the series, right? So that's a level of guys can get kind of knocked
by
off.
guarding Steph.
Right. And talk about a team that can, if you are mentally in a place where like you're not feeling good about your jump shot, you're not, like that's a team that's broken a lot of teams that are, and a lot of guys that are in that sort of space. And so to fight through that and then play well in the Denver series as well, I think that like he warranted bigger offers, right? And I think that but a lot of what he said and communicated on social media, and just like the Laker for Life post, and Aaron Riley, his agent, posted this great video that started out with Dr. Buss's voice, and like the whole video was about getting 18, right? And winning a championship and how important that is to him and to them. And like of all the things they could have posted on that front, right?
Yeah.
It, like
I would have
been the whole story.
the gif of me diving into a pool of money would have been my choice.
Right, exactly. Like this dude is that ultimate, like, came from Pine Bluffs of Arkansas, right? It's almost this
Yeah.
mythological, right? Undrafted free agent, balls out, right? He could have like told his own
Drake playing in the
story,
background.
right? This could have been like the culmination of like, look, I finally signed the big contract,
Yeah.
and this is like the payoff of all of the hard work that I've done as the money. But
Yeah.
that's not what he did. What he
Yeah.
did was like, no, let's go freaking get number 18
Job's not
now.
done.
So when I saw those posts, man, from Austin, I was like, and it was just symbolic of, that's why I think that like long-term mentality and that like, let's go get 18 is like, that's what we're about now.
Yeah.
And we've kind of like studied the waters, and this offseason has shown that, but now there's the work to do to go get 18.
Yeah, I've always thought that Lakers exceptionalism is like this two-sided coin, right? Lakers exceptionalism on the positive side is there are exceptional expectations because you're a Laker, and living up to that makes you exceptional. On the negative side is the belief that anybody who is any way connected to the Lakers is therefore exceptional, right? And I said this about Rui too, and it was funny while you were talking about Reaves, I found myself kind of smiling because it was a lot of the same stuff that I felt about Reaves or Rui.
Yep.
And it's like Rui for years before he was a Laker wanted to be a Laker, right? Reaves now understands the commitment that is being a Laker for life or whatever. And it also kind of harkens back to Shannon Brown. Remember the Adam Morrison Shannon Brown trade? And Adam Morrison was like the big get.
Yeah.
And
Shannon Brown was the throw-in.
He was a throw-in. And I remember they talked to Shannon, and in his first interview, he was just like, I am just so fucking excited to be a Laker. I am so like and it was just clear he was over the moon about wanting to be a Laker and wanting to contribute to this franchise in particular. And I watched that and I was like, oh, he's somebody to watch. He's like, we might, that might be the starting point of something kind of interesting here. And lo and behold, the first time that we see him, he has the greatest foul in the history of fouls, right? Was that
the Atlanta on Mario West. Yep.
Yeah. Where and that's that's where the Lakers gif is born, where it's Kobe and Lamar and everybody on the bench.
Yeah, one of the iconic visuals of that era. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just when all of that was happening, and Shannon Brown goes on to like participate in the dunk contest, and he has like meaningful moments in playoff series and stuff. I always just kind of thought back to that is the notion of like knowing what it means to be a Laker, right? And it's this ambiguous thing that sometimes can be a cliche, sometimes it can be productive, and I think in both of these cases with Rui and with Reaves, I think it's going to be productive. I think it's something that like them understanding the commitment is really important here, because again, if we start with where we started here, I want guys to outperform those teen contracts, and if you are going to have guys on your books at those numbers, then you want them to the major separating factor here is going to be either guys exceeding max contracts and or guys exceeding mid-tier contracts, because everybody is going to have a couple people in those number range, and it's just a matter of the math that goes into those wins. And I think with this being a factor here is a really important one to keep an eye on. I want to talk about Vincent. Vincent is an interesting one. He's, to me, his upside, or his like the best version of Gabe Vincent is kind of your prototypical point guard playing next to elite wings, right?
Yep.
Knocks down open shots, has a nice quick release, so the teams have to care if he's open. That was the thing that was always kind of put the gum in offense with Dennis, was his long kind of catapult wind up for a shot, and then gets after it defensively. Vincent does, and I think importantly here is able to succeed in different kinds of, or with different kinds of windows on the ball. That's so important here with Vincent. How did you feel about that signing?
That again is, I think, spot on, that operating on different windows while on the ball. That, like Dennis, who I think I'm higher on Dennis than most most
Me,
are. And
for
there's
sure.
a reason. Then you are for sure. We certainly had our text disagreement, but he got paid, did he not? At least one
He
other
did.
person
He did.
thought he was worth the damn, right? And so,
Yeah.
Dennis to me like is that point of attack defender, that guy that can really. We were really good defense, and he was the first defender that defenses often met. That means
Mhm.
something, and especially in this type of defensive system where the guards have to do a lot of work. They have less help from like hedging bigs than than a lot of teams. And when they do get help, it's from the other guard like stunting over and kind of
Yeah.
reaching a hand in on a drive. And so again, you have to do a lot of work. And so just Dennis's speed and motor, I think, is really high end and was really helpful. So Vincent is a good defender. I think he's a slight downgrade
Yeah.
from Dennis. I think
He's not as long.
yeah, right. He's not quite as like Dennis could get over screens, and he's a really good athlete. And in ways that Vincent isn't quite that level. But Vincent is very good at this. And so I think the discrepancy between how good Dennis is, what was it that for us, versus how good Vincent will be is going to be important. But I think it's more than made up for on the offensive end in that, like game 4 against Denver, when Dennis had started that game and was starting the third quarter, a lot of those possessions kept ending in Dennis's hands and asking him to do something where that like slow catapult shot, like,
Oof.
no, actually, you're going to have a very tall wing closing out to you aggressively. So you don't have
Yeah.
time to shoot that shot. Like Vincent will take and hit those shots. He's streaky, right? And so like, if you look at the percentages, it's not very striking, but he's taking very high end, high caliber shots. And that's why he's five times in the playoffs, 20 points plus, right?
Mhm.
Hitting big shots in big games is because he takes these types of shots all season. It's not just the slow, let me gather my feet and have time to get it off type of shots.
Well, and he can play like the thing that always kind of worried me with Dennis, and it was the reason I didn't really want Dennis back, was if Dennis is the second guard in a lineup, he has to be on the ball. And
Great point. Yep.
if he is on the ball, that means Reaves isn't on the ball. That means LeBron isn't on the ball. Whereas like Gabe doesn't have to be on the ball. Mm-hmm. He will spend some time on it. Don't get me wrong, but like those lineups are going to make a lot more sense, and those possessions are going to make a lot more sense. Like there was no worse feeling to me in those in that Denver series and just in games in general where you would get down to these clutch moments and be like, man, it feels like a lot of Dennis. It feels like
but that's what I'm saying. It ends like because the defense can influence toward Dennis, right? Like the way they're guarding, he is the open guy. The ball's going to end up in his hands. And so whenever I felt that way in the third quarter. That's what the point I was making there too, is like, but that is always going to happen in a playoff series. And so if you're guarding guys like that with Vincent out there and the ball gets swing over to the corner, that's a really good shot for him. You're not going to guard him that way. And so I think that's one of the big points about that transition from Dennis to Vincent is like teams will have to guard us differently.
Yeah. I also think I agree with you. You were like objectively correct in like the differences athletically there, but I think approach is interesting here with Gabe versus Dennis, whereas like Dennis would kind of get in and then back off and then kind of like, slink his way around a screen, right? Kind of cat-like, right? Where he would just kind of like, you would see his whole body contort and he would get way around the screen.
Very fun to watch. Yeah.
It was wild to watch. Vincent, and this is where I think I'm really interested to see how the Lakers are refereed, because Vincent, if he is on, he gets in and he stays in. And it makes it really uncomfortable for point guards to try to get around the screen in the first place. And if he's allowed to hand check here and there, and if the league kind of knocks off some of the grifting stuff, as they are indicating they might with some of these flopping changes in the CBA, I'm really curious what that does to Vincent's defense. I do think he might be pretty good there.
Yeah, that's that like being a physical type of defender. It's funny watching his Miami highlights and the number 2. It's like easy to see a little bit of Derek Fisher in him. He's not quite as strong, but that idea of strength being more and more important with the changes.
Remember, I used to love watching Fisher defend Chris Paul. Like it was
Yes.
always so fun to watch Fisher defend Chris Paul because he would just kind of, and again, back then you were allowed to be a little bit more physical and you could just, and Chris Paul didn't have like the reputation with refs that he developed over the years. So like he would try to grift and it didn't really matter. But with Fisher, he would just kind of, he would get his, he was really smart the way that he did it, right? Because the worst thing you can do defensively is stick your hand out all the way out, right, and have somebody dribble into your hand. But if you let somebody dribble into your shoulder, or if you tuck your elbow in just a little bit and they're running into your elbow, that's the kind of stuff that I really do hope. Like I really thought that the playoffs this year resembled to me like the type of basketball I really like watching. A little
Yeah.
more physicality on
Me
the
too.
perimeter, stuff like that. And if they allow some of that in the regular season next year, which we don't know, this could go either way. But if they do, I think that positions Gabe fairly well to defend, especially if he's the backup guard and you aren't too worried about him fouling out.
Yeah, and this plays into the whole idea of the Lakers sizing up to me.
Yeah.
So much, and rightfully so, I think, of the conversation about the Lakers getting
Yes.
bigger is based around the 5 spot, right?
Hmm.
And I think ultimately, like, do not get killed in the minutes that Anthony Davis does not play in the playoffs is a bar to reach in
Yeah.
terms of those 12 minutes or whatever they are. Like, that's what we want to be able to do with those minutes. But that's not the only place that you can size up, right? And
Hmm.
so that distinction, even though I think Dennis is a better point of attack defender as a whole, that distinction you're making about, well, yeah, but Vincent is stronger and more physical, that is a way of sizing up in a way.
Hmm.
It's not to the same degree of getting a big physical 5, but I think we did that at other positions too, right? To a
Yeah.
degree. And
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
even like one of the as the dust settles um parts of this offseason to me, it's and along with his summer league performance, it screams like, oh, Max Christie's going to have a role on this
Hmm.
team's rotation, right? And
He looks
so
good.
he does, doesn't he? Right. And so going to Max and like the type of big physical type of guard, like he's a big 2. And
Yeah.
that's different than the approach that we had. We had Pat Bev at the 3 for a good part of the
Yeah.
beginning of
You got
last season,
Austin at
right?
the 4.
Oh man, it was so like, and that was why I was so defensive about Russ. It's like we lit the whole house on fire, and we're
Yeah.
like, look at this guy, right? Like, what a jerk. And I'm like, we don't have to play Pat Bev at the 3,
I mean,
like
in fairness, Russ was often playing with matches while the house was on fire.
look, we don't need to relitigate it to a great, but we didn't have to do all that. We could have forwards
Yeah.
on the team and Russell Westbrook on the team. That's
Yeah.
all I'm saying.
Mhm.
Anyhow, it's nice to be in a much better place in that respect.
Yeah, like you watched the series against Denver, and Denver is a tough example because they're just huge. Like they are a
Uh-huh.
huge team. Jamal's a big point guard. KCP's a big 2. MPJ is a huge small forward. He's like 6'9", and then you have Aaron Gordon, who's this big power forward, and you have Jokic, who's like, I think to me the most dominating presence in like physically in the game right now. With you just can't move him. He if he says like I want to be here,
Mhm.
you just like try to not let that happen, and good luck. But you watch the Lakers in that series, and they look like a JV team a lot of times. They look so small, and between, so I do think Max is going to get more and more minutes. Like one thing I'm really watching for, I'm not predicting it per se, but like if D'Angelo Russell starts the year as the starting point guard, it wouldn't, and we see enough minutes of Max Christie, I do kind of wonder if eventually we're going to start saying like, should Max be starting
Right.
here?
Mm.
Should we not? I really like the idea of having Vincent run second units and work as like the point guard with LeBron or the point guard with AD when one of those two guys sit.
Okay.
But yeah, I do kind of wonder if eventually we're gonna be like, does Max make a little more sense next to Austin? He gets after it defensively, all that stuff. Not
I've
right
been
away.
I've been
I think,
wishing Max was like 23 years old since we've gotten him, right? Because
yeah,
it's like he's exactly the type of guy we need at that spot. It's just
yeah,
you're asking like we're looking to contend for a championship, right? You're
yes,
asking a 20-year-old to be a starter on a championship team. It's a
yeah.
big ask.
I know. However, he looked like he fit in last year. I never watched him play and thought to myself like that guy is in over his head,
I
and
agree.
That's insane for a 19-year-old second round player.
Hell yeah, but looking like you belong and being a starter on a championship team.
Oh, dude, huge
big gulf.
difference. Yeah, absolutely. I do kind of think Russell winds up getting moved for somebody at that position who like makes a little more sense. But we'll see. We don't know. Like there just aren't trades anymore, which is the weirdest. Like role player for role player trades, we just aren't seeing very many of them anymore. The next one, I want to talk about Taurean Prince because a wing shooter, a career 37% shooter from 3-point range, 6'8". I thought Minnesota looked their best last year when he was on the court a lot. I getting him at the biannual, I thought for sure, because I think last year he actually made like $7 million, or he was in line to make $7 million. He winds up taking a bit of a pay cut this year. I thought for sure that wouldn't be the case. I didn't, or if they were going to get him, it was going to cost like $7 million. And they get him for the biannual. I think he slots in really nicely as the first wing off of the bench because of the flexibility and because of the shooting and stuff. But I think at varying points over the season, we're gonna be looking at like his on-off numbers and start to wonder like if there's a way to get him more minutes, because his shooting ability is not something that the Lakers really have. Rui shot well in the postseason, and I think that's why he started to make as much sense in those groups as he did. But with Prince starting there, like starting as a really good shooter, if his numbers hold up, which is always a big if for some reason with the Lakers, if those numbers hold up, I do think he's going to be one of like the on-off darlings of the season.
Interesting. Yeah, that's something to keep an eye on. I think that we're around the same distance on Prince as we are on Dennis, but in the opposite direction. I like Prince, but see, you belong to Trudell is this way too. You belong to the Church of the Big Wing. That's what I call it, right? Like y'all can't have enough wings. If you had 12 wings on a roster, you'd be happy.
You know what my favorite meal is? Wings.
So
it isn't, but it fits the joke.
I think basketball is more diverse than that. Anyhow, this is one of the places where we disagree, right? And so for one, I think Prince will be a good jump shooter. I think what I think what makes it less likely for him to be an on-off type of darling is that I think he's strictly a 3. And the reason that I think he's strictly a 3 is because he's a really bad rebounder. Yeah. And so that's something when I look across the course of the whole roster, I don't love our rebounding right now. And that's why the type of big to me, like if that one last slot is like, I think that needs to be more fit than any other guy that we signed, in that like that it needs to address that rebounding and physicality, screen setting, because Hayes isn't a great screen setter. Right. And so just, I think that's a weakness that we have. Yeah, exactly. That type of big. I think that we could use a goon. And so Prince being a really bad rebounder for his size is something that I think keeps him at the 3, especially on a team that's going to have LeBron and Vando and Rui. That said, his jump shooting, I think he's, I've been burned before, but I think he's going to buck the trend of jump shooters that come here, because he's a professional jump shooter he hits the type of shots that LeBron and AD will create, and that like teams have been defending us a certain way really since the 1920 season, even in the year that we won a championship, where our overall jump shooting was not high caliber, like good enough as a team to really make teams guard us differently. And so I think like the Vincent and Prince additions, especially, and even Hayes provides a degree of vertical spacing that's going to matter in this respect, that I just think the spacing on this team is the best it's been in years.
Yeah, I mean, low bar, but yeah, I think
yes. Oh yeah,
but I think the thing that that you're absolutely right in pointing out the type of shots that Prince is bringing to the table, and so like one thing that I've been really focusing on this offseason, and eventually I'm going to write about it for Substack, is like, why do shooters come to the Lakers and die? Like, what is going on there, right? There's some funny stuff like league wide. people playing in crypto, for some reason, like league wide numbers, like Steph for some reason doesn't shoot very well in that building, and I think some of it is actually the lighting. Like the Lakers
I
do
agree.
something a little different with their lighting. They do the boxing ring thing where everything
Yep.
is dark behind the basket, and that's
Yep.
very different from everywhere else. So I think that takes some getting used to. But that wouldn't necessarily explain why all like Lakers actually shoot differently there too. Like you would think there would be a home court advantage, rather than like it just messing with everybody. But I think like what you're talking about is an important distinction in that like the types of threes that the Lakers created up until last season. I think the shot type got better last season, but like under Frank Vogel, if the Lakers shot three, it was like above the break stuff.
Yeah.
It was out of rhythm stuff. It was like LeBron shooting off of the dribble, and him needing to because teams were going under screens so often. So like I think some of it is shot diet, some of it is like hilariously ambiance. But I think with Prince, his shot diet fits into exactly the kind of shot that the Lakers need to be shooting more of, and teams need to give the Lakers. Like that it's really important here to notice that like this isn't some weird matchup thing. This isn't like Denver for some reason forcing the Lakers into these shots. It is everybody forces the Lakers into these
Yes.
shots, and the Lakers haven't had anybody equipped going in to knock down those kinds of shots. And that's why I think Prince, like, we're going to look at there's a reason he's a, whatever he is, $5 million player, and not like a $15 million player. And it's the rebounding, and some of his defense leaves something to be desired too, right? Just general physicality. But with his offensive presence, and especially compared to the guys that he is like competing for minutes with, right? Unless Rui just is the shooter that we saw in the playoffs, which maybe it'd be awesome. It'd be great.
I think part of with what happened with Rui is like, I don't know, give him people 20 games to like figure each other out. And I actually have a kind of old school LFR video coming out soon on Rui, and his ability to attack closeouts is kind of the main theme of it. And it's like Jovan has been reporting that Rui's in the mix to start next year, which is an idea that I love, because that's been one of the aha moments for me with him, is that, I think he's a big three. I think that's ultimately like the position he plays.
He moves his feet better than people think.
Yes, and he poses such a mismatch on the other end of the floor that he poses a problem for you that you don't quite pose for him usually at that spot, right? And I think he's been positioned, as the league has been smaller, at the four a lot since he's been drafted, and he's okay at that, but he's not really a great standstill leaper, and just not a great like leaper in general. He's strong and he generates speed, right? He moves his feet well, but he doesn't get a whole lot of lift, so he's not going to protect the rim all that well, unless he gets a running start. And so him being at that three position, if he can knock down that three, which is the key, right? If he can attack a closeout, he's so much bigger than the guys that are closing out to him that he's just manhandling them on the way to the basket. And when you think about how that helps out LeBron and AD, just from have a big athlete next to them that is active, can help on the boards. We saw this with Vando,
big,
a bit
strong
too, right?
hands too.
Right. And that can score and can be the guy that you put your best defenders on LeBron and AD, obviously. Well, now you got this guy on Rui. Rui, go kick his ass, And and so I just think it's a really good fit. And so I think Rui's shooting is real. He's not going to shoot 49% like he did.
That's
playoffs,
more
right?
what I meant. Yeah.
For sure. But I think that really complementary package, I think that that was a function of him figuring it out, just because they finally got time to play together.
Well, and I think, and this is where the Lakers deserve credit for their developmental program, is like he came in. I always thought he was kind of rudderless in Washington, which everybody was. Washington does not own rudders, apparently. The Washington Wizards, no rudders to be found in the organization. And it always felt like a whole bunch of talent that was just aimlessly thrown out there. Please work. How? I don't know. Figure it out. And when he got to the Lakers, I thought that defensively, this was where it was the most apparent, where you watch him at the very beginning, and it was just like his rotations were just like, what? Like
He was lost.
yeah, and but then like over the course of the year, you started to see those rotations seem to make more
Mhm.
sense. And if he was making a mistake, it was because like it was more an error of commission rather than omission, right?
Yep, and you can
That's
live
your
with
favorite.
those. Yep.
Yeah. And you know, so you see that, and then you also start to see like I've always thought he was a really talented player, and you give a talented player direction, and you tell them which shots to focus on, which spots to focus on.
Yep.
That's where you start to see it make start to click, and yeah, like him starting, I've always like. I hope there was never a scenario where he wasn't going to start. You're paying him 17 mil. If he's starting there and he knows going in those exact things that unlocked his game in the first place, then I think it makes total sense.
Now that has an interesting impact on our defense, though, right? Because Vando became one of the big revelations about him was like, oh, Vando is a perimeter defender. He can
Yeah.
really do this well against a lot of different kind of guys, and so it allows you to play this D'Lo Austin backcourt where you have Austin
Yeah.
as the chaser, you have D'Lo, kind of as defending
On the other guy.
stationary, on the other guy, basically, right? And that kind of structures your starters that way defensively. Having Rui do that, like he was able to defend certain kind of guys, but I think the Golden State series was an example where actually no, he's not a three, not in that series, right?
Yeah.
And so, what do you think that does to the Lakers' defense? Like, who are the Lakers go guard him kind of guys that within a Rui starts kind of situation?
Well, I think like especially because he's playing next to LeBron, Austin makes the most sense as the go get him guy. I'm not saying he's putting clamps on anybody, but
Sure.
he competes, and he competes in ways that like D'Lo doesn't, and so I think he is kind of, especially if he's playing next to LeBron, and LeBron is going to have some of the creative responsibilities there, and you can use some of your energy on that defensive end that you wouldn't be able to on teams that wouldn't have a creator like LeBron.
Mhm.
I think he makes the most sense there. But I think for them, and this is where actually you can make a case for Gabe to start over D'Lo.
Yep.
Is because of that. Not just like I'm not saying Gabe is the go get him guy. I actually like him as more connective defensively. He connects that starting group together. And the other point of it too, and I mentioned this to Sedano, and I mentioned earlier that I think eventually D'Lo gets traded. That way, if you do trade D'Lo, you aren't messing with the starting point guard, and you have that continuity for the entirety of the season. So, talent wise, I think D'Lo makes sense as the starter. He's the more talented player. But if you're talking about fit, and this was one thing that remember way back in the day, we assembled we had our top 5 Lakers drafts, right? And you drafted Trevor Ariza or something like that. And I was like, why are you drafting James Worthy's right there, And you were like, yeah, but somebody has to defend, right? Somebody has to. So you took into account fit and positionality and all of that stuff. And I think Gabe is the less talented player, but he makes more sense with the fit there. So I think that's going to be interesting. I've always thought Rui made more sense to start. And I actually, the more that I really take a look at the rotation, I think Vincent probably makes more sense to start.
Yeah, interesting training camp ahead, but certainly study your waters than the last few years.
That's and really I think that's the theme of this episode, right? Is the notion that going into the season, you have a logical roster. Going into the season, you have a group that collectively makes sense. And I totally understand why fans would be over the moon about that. And I also am over the moon about that aspect of it. But
we're in a much healthier place than we were before. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I'm not going to call, healthy. I'm going to call healthy. I'm going to call logical. I'm not going to call it a miracle. They didn't reinvent the wheel here. I mean, compared to previous off seasons, sure, maybe. Yeah, they did, walk on water. But in this, and especially compared to, given the opportunity that they seem to have in front of them, where it's a wide open West still, the Nuggets got worse. And they are really going to be relying on some young players next year that, we were talking about Max stepping forward. Christian Brown is apparently going to be a a huge part of that in an expanded role. We'll see how that looks.
Peyton Watson will probably get some run, and
Yeah.
Najee. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like it's a different thing when you go from like cult hero to like expected to hold up the Marvel universe, right? Just ask
Yep.
the guy who's the new Captain America. But like, I think I like this collection of guys. I like the collection of talent. Um, so long as they go out and get a bigger center. So long as you go out and get the goon.
Yeah.
Get the goon that like really pieces it all together. And I think that this roster is about as good, logically as the Lakers have had since like the first Dennis Schroeder year.
I agree with that. And with the goon part though, it's like every time I talk to somebody about this, we talk in like theoreticals, like go get this player that I really want to have on this archetype that I want to have on my team. And it's like, well, look at the dudes who are free agents, right? Like these are the actual human beings that you have as options to sign as opposed to this theoretical. And one of the things that I thought was interesting with the offseason was the saving a little bit on the MLE with Vincent to maybe throw out a buyout guy. Although, if you look around the league and with the play-in, and with freaking 20 teams making some version of the playoffs, how many teams are going to be at that point of March 1st and being like, yeah, good player, we're going to buy you out and not have you as part of our playoff run, and just pay you to go home. Like, I think there's going to be probably
especially after last year with Miami, right? Like Kevin Love gets bought out and he's a huge part of a team that gets to the finals. Everybody's going to be like, well, we don't want to make that mistake. Cleveland looked like complete idiots for doing that. And it's just like, and that's the one thing that I think has defined this offseason is like nobody wants to look like idiots. Everybody is doing the hyper conservative thing, holding on to their guys, not making the mistake that gets them fired. And I think that's probably going to define everything kind of moving forward as everybody figures out the CBA. Yeah. I want to send you off here. Anything you want to plug? You mentioned the video that you're working on for the Lakers. Again, the LFR pod, the Laker Film Room pod with you and Darius and Mike is always great. Anything else that you want to mention?
No, man, we just got some good stuff on the Lakers channels coming up about the guys that we've signed and re-signed. And yeah, just excited about what we'll be putting out over the course of the summer. So.
I also want to mention an unsung hero here because like the hosts get all the love, but Jeannie does insane work.
She's
throwing the episodes together. I hate editing 2-man pods. Editing 3-person pods is just unreal.
She doesn't throw nothing together, man. She has that shit down tight, right?
Yeah.
So like, no, Jeannie, there is no LFR pod without her. So
yep. All right. That is going to do it here for this episode. Again, thanks a ton, man, for hopping on, and thanks for hopping on as regularly as you have since we got this thing off of the ground. Best of luck here, wrapping up the offseason. Enjoy what little offseason we're about to get, and I'll talk to you in a few weeks or so.
All right, man. Talk soon.